and journalist from Sussex. Caroline, what are your views on this? I mean, can a throuple work? Can you have three people in a relationship?
Well, obviously, you can, because you've spoken to
Yeah.
someone who's in that situation. So, yeah, on one level, I think you can, but I'm quite skeptical about it, because we know anthropologically, humans are designed for pair bonding, and there's two different kinds of bonds we have with people. We either have a social bond, which is fairly obvious, which we have with our friends and our family, or we have a sexual bond. And I think it's very difficult. I mean, I'm not saying that it can't be done, but I think it is very difficult in these situations. What you invariably end up with, one partner getting jealous, and it's introducing kind of extra sort of strains, extra burdens, extra dissonance on that relationship. Because one of the things that we have when we're kind of sexually bonded to somebody is, sort of sexual jealousy, and jealousy is a natural and inevitable part. And I think it actually lessens the bond that two people have with each other if they're then trying to sort of share it around between three. And while it might work very nicely, supposedly, when it's just adults, I think when you then start introducing children into that situation, it becomes potentially a lot more problematic.
I can see what you're saying. It's a complicated situation. I mean, that was the thing that got me about the throuple we spoke to. They didn't seem to have any jealousy.
No. I mean, I don't personally understand that, but back in the olden days, children were raised with extended families, weren't they? Is this a way? Could we view it in that way?
Well, I think an extended family is really where you've had a relationship that hasn't worked out, and everybody sort of has to make the best of it, really, because you recognise, and I've got an extended family myself. I've got a child from a previous relationship and 4 children from my current marriage, and I think we have to recognise that extended families are really trying to make the best out of what isn't an ideal situation. So we do know, for example, that all the research and all the evidence shows us that everything else being equal, children do best, the outcomes for children are best when they're brought up by their biological mother and father in a stable, happy, loving relationship. And that's not to have a go at any other situations, because we know life is messy and we know that stuff goes wrong. But I think if you've then got 3 people in that situation, and then you introduce children into it, what happens if that situation falls apart? Do you then have 3 people all sort of wanting a claim on the child, and then what happens if they get into another throuple, and then do you see what I mean? And I think it can be very destabilizing for children, and it sounds to me very much, and I'm being asked to comment on it, so this is why obviously I'm going to sound judgmental, because you're asking me to make a judgment on it, but it feels very much to me as though it's almost a little bit of insecurity or immaturity, and adults perhaps not wanting to commit to just one other person, sort of wanting to have their cake and eat it too. And what works for you maybe in your 20s and your 30s isn't necessarily going to be successful for you in your 80s, and you could just end up with quite a trail of broken hearts, destructiveness, and I think
that happens in traditional relationships, doesn't it? I mean, sure. One of the things I thought was really interesting, Kathy was saying about the school her child attends is it's a kind of non-judgment, I can't remember the term she used, but a school that kind of really respects all views. Yeah. I just are we using our hardwired, old-fashioned emotions and takes on something now that actually has opened up and has, because there's mothers and mothers for a child, there's fathers and fathers for a child, there's 2 mothers and there's 2 fathers for a child. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think, of course, where you've got children, of course a school it's very wrong to stigmatise a child because they come from a very different background from the majority. And I think that's what schools mean, is they're saying, okay, we're we respect all views, and that's right. You can respect all people, but actually you don't have to respect a view that's different to yours. You can just respect the person that holds it, because there are all sorts of views that some are good and some are, there are some views that, we would all commonly agree with are quite abhorrent. So, yes, it's right and proper that a child shouldn't be stigmatized, but there's a difference between that and saying, oh, do you know what, it doesn't matter, it's all fine, all things are equal, everybody's the same, because I don't think that actually you can say, or I certainly can't say hand on heart, that a child in a relationship which is basically for the satisfaction of adults, adults are really putting their kind of sexual desires first. I just don't see that as being optimum for children, and there hasn't really been enough kind of statistical research and analysis and papers done on this, because it is such a rare occurrence. And it would be interesting, I think, to see in 30, 40 years' time if thruples become more popular, what the empirical evidence shows, or what the children themselves have to say about how they were brought up.
What if setting up as a throuple actually stops a divorce? So what if you've got a couple who would have got divorced had they not introduced a third party? Could you not argue, well, actually, in this way, you are keeping the family unit together?
I think, basically we're a couple that, it almost feels a little bit like emotional blackmail, doesn't it? Unless we can introduce a third person into this relationship, then it's not going to work and we're not going to be together. I think that shows that there's something dysfunctional in the relationship in the first place. It's a very interesting sort of metaphorical question. I don't think there's any evidence that thruples do keep family units together, and I think the evidence would suggest that actually when you introduce a third person into that relationship, then you're introducing a third person with needs, with their own sort of emotional needs and baggage that we all have. We all have needs, and it just kind of adds a complicating factor into what already might be a difficult situation. So, I'd be interested to know if there were people whose marriages were struggling and they sort of decided to
did a throuple save your
because
marriage.
They always say, don't they, if your marriage is struggling, then you shouldn't sort of have a baby to shore it up. So why on earth, you'd then need an extra sexual partner to shore it up? That doesn't seem to make logical sense. And it isn't, for me, I was thinking about this earlier, this isn't about, attacking people, for making different moral choices. I certainly wouldn't be looking to, you can't stop consenting adults from doing what they want in their own bedroom. But what I would be very, very wary of is anything that's tried to say, okay, well, let's legalize this. Let's put this on the same status as, say, marriage, because it certainly isn't. And in fact, marriage is all about protecting children and inheritance rights and things, and then you add three people into that, I think then you've got the state. Why would you want the state to sort of recognise your relationship in that way? It seems strange.
There can, of course, be marriages without children. Do you are you happy with thruples if there are no children involved?
Well, I wouldn't say happy with, because it's not. I think perhaps they are less problematic if there aren't children involved. But at the same time, I think, where you have sort of marriage rights and things and benefits and households, normally, people who are married and living together, they kind of get extra benefits and what have you, because they recognise that it's a family unit. But there, where you've got three people, you've maybe got three incomes coming into the house. So you've got actually more income. So why would you then need to try and say, well, actually the state needs to do this, this and this for me? I think it would need a lot of thought. But generally speaking, it seems to me that a throuple is just like, an open relationship, a sexual relationship. And, yes, I would be really wary of introducing children into that situation.
Caroline, thank you so much for joining us. Interesting. Caroline Farrow with her thoughts. I wonder whether, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, it will be